disrobing is as powerful as the nakedness itself.
It's certainly true, because it's about that act of kind of transitioning, isn't it? And certainly that was recognised by the early nudists or naturists, where firstly, almost always they would require total nudity because they recognised that a little bit of clothing could actually be more erotic than being totally naked. And the second thing that they would usually prohibit was undressing in public. And that's still the case in certain kinds of nudist clubs today, where undressing, it's associated with the practice of striptease, so it conjures up ideas and sensations concerned with the erotic. And it's something about the single state of being naked or clothed, but you're quite right, there's something about transition that reminds us all that we're moving from one kind of culturally sanctioned state of being into another, and so it's more dangerous culturally.
My name is Josie McClellan and I'm reader in Modern European History at the University of Bristol. I think the history of nudity and nudism in Germany has always been very politicised, and people have always been attracted to it for different reasons. So even before the Second World War, you have people who are social democrats and are pursuing nudism because they think it's a good way of getting working people out into the countryside and improving their health. But you've got people who are on the right who are engaging in nudism because they think this is a way of showing the racial superiority of the German state.
And after the Second World War, attitudes in East Germany appear to have changed.
Well, I think the East German authorities were very suspicious of and partly that was because they had moral concerns. They thought people are naked, anything could happen. But I think they also felt that it was politically suspect because it had these associations not just with social democracy, but also with the right wing and with Nazism itself.
So what did they do to try to control it?
They tried to ban it.
And how did that go down?
People just thought it was ridiculous, and they launched this campaign of civil disobedience, which was often linked with an element of ridicule. So they would laugh at the policemen who were patrolling the beaches, or they would turn up at the beach wearing just a tie around their necks, and when the policemen tried to apprehend them, they'd say, well, I'm not naked, I'm wearing a tie. So it was really impossible for the regime to enforce the ban.
And they lifted the ban?
They did in 1960. It really snowballed and more people got involved, and they also started to want to go beyond just swimming in the nude. They wanted to have more of a nudist lifestyle, so they would be naked on campsites and they would want to go shopping naked. And at a certain point in the mid-60s, the regime realised that if you can't beat them, you've got to join them. So they started promoting nudism as part of the socialist way of life. They published guidebooks to nudist beaches. There was quite a lot of photography around nudism as well, so they would have photographs of naked families as proof that the GDR, East Germany, was a great place to raise your children. But then there is also this other strand of nude photography. At an early stage are producing and publishing nude photographs. East German consumers are getting hold of soft pornography from the West, and the East German state feel like they have to compete with that.
Why do you think nudity is such a powerful thing? Something that the authorities are most fearful of, and then you.
It's strongly associated with sex. Sex is a powerful thing and also a taboo thing. The interesting thing about the East German story is the way the authorities get over their anxiety about nudity and really take a very pragmatic attitude. And it's almost like they're saying, well, what's in this for us? How can we use this to strengthen socialism?
Our tactic is the topless portrait.
Ina Shevchenko is one of the founders of the feminist group Femme. It began in the Ukraine and spread around the world.
I even couldn't imagine that one day I will go out in the street and take off my shirt for tourism. Because for me, for a young Ukrainian girl, it was clear that women's body is something that can be exposed for men's pleasure and only by men's request. We were totally desperate, thinking of how to bring attention, how to force them to finally look at our problems and finally listen to us. We understood that this is how patriarchal system is working, and we decided to use their instrument against them. We proposed a new meaning, a new idea, a new interpretation of what naked body can be today. We decided to move naked women's body into political context and to take away the smile and to let her scream. And this way we believe we are destroying all the sexist, trivial imaginations about what naked woman is.
Given the fact that we all have bodies, we all know what the naked form looks like, why do you think it's so shocking for some people?
It's not shocking as long as it is within the system, serving someone's needs, as long as it is in someone's hands as an instrument to earn money or to give a pleasure. But when the body is free, when the body is out of control, this is something that is shocking because society is not used to free bodies.
You said you never imagined that you would carry out a topless protest like this when you were young. What was it like the first time?
It took around 6-7 months of a big debate, even ideological fights with our group. Some members were in favor of it, some like me were against it. Of course, my arguments were how can you fight sexist ideas being naked?
What changed your mind?
I wish I would have a possibility to put another meaning to it. I knew that my first topless protest would be followed by many attacks from friends, relatives, people around who will not accept such a thing.
And was it?
Definitely was that. And this proved to me that this is my instrument, this is my weapon. It's a peaceful weapon, but a very aggressive weapon to the system and to the society. We've been arrested and persecuted in Ukraine, in Russia. We are still arrested in many other countries where activists are appearing. And political nudity is not pleasing anybody.
It's always very easy for female nudity to be pushed into sympathy. So you see paintings like Delphi's Liberty leading the revolution, and so she's bare-breasted in that. And it's absolutely clear that this is meant to be an image of courage, of heroism, and so on. But it doesn't always work. Sometimes women who've tried to use toplessness as a form of protest, for example, it works in one way because you get easy media coverage, but it's always precarious because it can be just reduced to being simply a kind of derisory sexism as a dominant response when really you're after something more courageous and so on.
As a young girl, I couldn't imagine that my body can do something else except serving men. Of course, when I did first topless protest, but to be honest, I didn't feel naked. I didn't have the feelings of embarrassment or feeling uncomfortable because the meaning of that naked act was completely different. It was totally new for me, but it was completely different. And I didn't feel naked. I felt like I'm just wearing a special uniform.
And what does your wife think of this?
I mean, a lot of people have got a really unenlightened view of doing something like this. You know, that there's something a bit dodgy about it, you know. People have been modelling for artists for hundreds of years, you know, and yet in this day and age, there's naked pictures and naked people are still sort of, oh, no, you wouldn't do that, you wouldn't do that. I find that rather strange.
Ian Jones is completely naked, arms raised, his stomach sagging a little, skin wrinkled. And 60 or so people, the majority women, are staring intently at him, every inch of him. But after a short while, you kind of stop seeing his nudity and start seeing his body. What are you looking for?
Just a sense of the swelling and the movement. It's about the shape, the negative space, and the shape of the shadows. It's less about no clothes, more about just something interesting to draw.
I can't draw the fact to save my life. I am the world's worst. So I think that's another reason I enjoy doing this. The nearest I can get to creating art, you know. And when somebody does a really good drawing of it, you just think, I contributed to that.
That was Mike Williams presenting
An ally has been slain.
Sadly, that's all we have time for this week. Thank you for listening to The Thought Show. I'm Lisa.
And I'm Ben Carter. Join us again at the same time next week. The BBC World Service.
Witness tells the story of great moments.
Crowd just froze, and then everybody started to stampede and ran in all kinds of different directions.
History told by the people who were there.
I had a rendezvous with my destiny.
Witness on the BBC World Service. Has been slain.
Coming next on the BBC World Service.
Hello, I'm John Lawrenson, and in half an hour on Heart and Soul, the Sunday Assembly, the Church Without God, founded last year in London, that's spreading fast across the world. Stay with us, the newsroom is next.
This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
19 hours GMT, 9 o'clock in Istanbul, as media employees are arrested on suspicion of forming an armed terrorist group and trying to seize control of the state.
This is a disgrace for Turkey. In the 21st century, a media group that has dozens of television channels, radio stations, websites and magazines should not be subjected to such treatment.
This is Andrew Beach in London. The latest from BBC Turkish in a moment. Also in the newsroom, Shinzo Abe wins the snap election in Japan.
I'm aware that there are still a lot of people who are still not feeling the benefits of my policies. But it's my duty to bring those benefits to those very people. And I believe this election made that clear.
And why the best-known weapon in the world is under threat because of sanctions against Russia.
The US market was extremely important. It's the biggest in the world. People like guns and they like shooting. And they were waiting for our product.
First, David, with the BBC World News.
BBC News with David Austin. Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has promised to continue with his radical economic policies after a resounding victory in a snap election. Mr. Abe's Liberal Democratic Party and his coalition partners retained the two-thirds majority he'd billed as a mandate for completing his reforms. Rupert Wingfield-Hayes reports from Tokyo.
Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's gamble to call an early election has paid off. But this victory is not a ringing endorsement of either Mr. Abe or his policies. Turnout was the lowest since World War II. Shinzo Abe is now the most powerful Prime Minister Japan has had in many years. The question now is, will he use that power to forge ahead with economic reform, or will he use it to push his other agenda of scrapping Japan's pacifist constitution and of attempting to whitewash the crimes committed by this country during World War II?
Senior European Union officials have warned Turkey that police action against opposition media outlets went against European values. The officials said Sunday's raids were incompatible with media freedom. More than 20 employees of TV networks, the newspaper and close to the US opposition cleric Fethullah Gulen were arrested. They're being held on suspicion of forming an armed terrorist group and trying to seize control of the state. Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, the leader of Turkey's main opposition party, described the arrests as a coup against democracy.
The process that we are going through is not something staged by healthy democracy. It's a coup. We can never accept dawn raids on journalists, their offices, or on the station.
In a mixed reaction to a new deal on climate change, read on negotiations in the Peruvian capital Lima. The European Union said the draft text was a step towards a global agreement next year, while India said it was happy that rich countries would continue to bear the lion's share of cuts in global emissions. However, environmental groups said the plan would do little to tackle emissions of greenhouse gases. Here's Asad Rahman from the campaign group Friends of the Earth.
What we saw was rich industrialized countries pretty much bullying poorer countries into accepting an outcome which would be quite catastrophic for many of their citizens. And whilst there is a political agreement, the planet and the people don't really care about a statement in itself. What's really needed is concrete actions.
There's been further fighting between forces loyal to the Syrian government and rebel groups in the north of the country. Pro-government forces have taken territory north of Aleppo as part of an effort to cut rebel supply lines to the country's second city. At least 21 Islamist rebels have died.
With perfect tempo.
World news from the BBC. The American Secretary of State John Kerry is meeting the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in Rome. The two men are expected to discuss the Ukraine crisis, Syria, and the Palestinian bid for statehood. The talks come in the wake of a US Senate bill calling for further sanctions on Moscow and the possibility of supplying military aid to Kiev. There have been reports of fighting in Libya for control of the main border crossing into Tunisia. Libya's internationally recognized government said its forces had taken control of the Ras Jadir frontier post, but that's been denied by officials there who back the right Islamist intelligence. A summit of Nobel Prize winners has warned that the world is at greater risk of nuclear conflict than at any time since the end of the Cold War. The 9 Nobel laureates said one of the greatest threats to peace is the continuing view of some great powers that they can achieve their goals through military force. They highlighted conflicts in Ukraine, Syria and Iraq, among others. In the Egyptian city of Luxor, a colossal statue of Pharaoh has been put back on its feet more than 3,000 years after it was toppled by an earthquake. In a ceremony marking the end of a restoration project, archaeologists unveiled the towering figure of Amenhotep III. Alan Johnston has this report.
The earthquake brought the towering statue crashing down, and for more than 30 centuries lay broken in many places. But now the pharaoh has risen again. The statue, unveiled at the gate of a temple on the banks of the Nile, stands 13 meters high. Nearby, like a mirror image, is another figure of the pharaoh, restored earlier this year. Both statues wear the symbolic white crown of Egypt, a fitting figure of the man who ruled over Egyptian civilization was at its height.
BBC News.
Thanks, David. This is Andrew Peach on the BBC World Service. Thanks for spending some time with us here in the newsroom. Latest on the outcome of that parliamentary election in Japan in a moment or two. First to Turkey and that big police operation against a TV station and newspaper loyal to the president's biggest political rival. More than 20 people have been arrested during early morning raids in Istanbul and other cities around Turkey. One of them was the head of the Samanyolu Media Group, and this is what he said to reporters.
Bu Türkiye için utanç verici bir manzara.
This is a disgrace for Turkey. In the 21st century, a media group that has dozens of television channels, radio stations, websites and magazines should not be subjected to such treatment. We're an international media outlet. We're broadcasting in foreign countries as well, and this will be seen as a disgrace in our history.
Just in a statement from the European Union on this, they say police raids were incompatible with freedom of the media, a core principle of democracy. Let's analyse this with Jill from BBC Turkish, who's here. What's going on here, Jill? This seems to be out of nowhere.
True. So those journalists arrested are close to Fethullah Gülen, the US-based cleric, which was a friend of Mr. Erdogan, the President Erdogan before, which now we see turning foes. They have formed a coalition of different ideologies, liberals, Islamists, conservatives by then, over 10 years ago. And this coalition has brought the AKP ruling party into power. But now, because of some certain conflict of interest, which is based on rather domestic and international issues, we see they are splitting their own ways. And this also goes back to a year ago when the corruption allegations, which were again allegedly done by the police officers close to Mr. Gülen, Fethullah Gülen, and those allegations involved the inner circle of President Erdogan. So this is now seen as a revenge movement by the power, the ruling party, over the police officers.
But does it actually present any threat to Erdogan and the Turkish government? Surely.
Threat, if it would be like both the political parties, it would make more sense. But now we are talking about a huge network with hands in judiciary, police and education. So a social movement with a lot of supporters. It could be a threat when the upcoming elections next year. But the government was tested the last two elections, presidential and parliamentary elections, which they won. The AKP again reached like more than 50%. So they passed those two tests. And the next one, if it's a threat or not, we will see it in the next parliamentary elections.
And the Turkish government certainly taking it very seriously when it knows it's going to encounter the displeasure of organisations like the European Council, talking in 2 days about Turkish membership.
True, Turkey is a country with a bid to become a EU. But also, during the ruling of the AKP, they have rather distanced themselves. Although they seem like they want to be a member, we see the rapprochement with the Middle Eastern countries. This has also raised a lot of questions whether Turkey wants to rather lean towards the Middle East and become perhaps a regional leader, which is also controversial because sanctions have failed in this case. But yes, certainly it is important for Turkey to receive those critics from the West, but we don't know how they will react.
Chel, thank you very much indeed for that. Chel Kasapoglu of BBC Turkish with me here in the newsroom. Now, as the ink dries on the latest climate change deal signed in Peru, participants and campaigners have been reflecting on its significance. The compromise agreed on Sunday forms the basis for a global treaty to be signed next year. The main stumbling block in these negotiations was how rich and poor countries bear the burden of cutting carbon emissions. Our environment correspondent Matt McGrath has been following the talks in Lima.
Just over 2 weeks ago, delegates from over 190 countries came here to Lima with optimism that they could put in place one of the key building blocks of a new global climate deal that's hoped to be signed by the end of next year. The reason for their optimism? Well, it was because the US and China in November had signed a new deal that would limit the amount of emissions from greenhouse gases that each country would produce. This was seen as an historic breakthrough. But the optimism that engendered hasn't survived through the course of this particular meeting. And the reason is as old as time. It's the differences between rich and poor countries. The rich countries here want to ensure that any pledges they make next year about combating climate change are all about cutting carbon emissions. The poorer countries want those pledges to include large amounts of money for countries to cope with the changes and the damage that's been done by climate change. The rich countries also want a broader number of nations to take on pledges. They want countries like India and Brazil and China to shoulder some of the burden. Those countries don't want to do that. In an effort to get some agreement here to move things forward, the president of this meeting decided that he would have to redraw the text, and in doing so, he's left out some of the most critical issues. They've been put off to be solved another day, kicked down the road, if you like. The problem with that is that somebody somewhere over the next 12 months have got to grasp those particular issues. If they don't, they're not solved, and the chances of getting a good, strong global deal on climate change in Paris next year will be significantly reduced.
Matt McGrath in Lima now. Just before the deal was struck in the early hours of Sunday morning, here in the newsroom we're speaking to Jennifer Morgan, Global Director of the Climate Programme at the World Resources Institute. Following the talks in Lima closely, and she's back with us. Jennifer, welcome back. What do you make of what's been agreed?
I actually think that it's a good stepping stone for the creation of a new way of countries cooperating on climate internationally. They managed to get a draft negotiating text that they have a year to work on, and they managed to get the information that countries need to use when they table their commitments next year well before the Paris meeting. So I think it's a good step towards that Paris agreement.
There's been a lot of critical words from campaigning groups around the world suggesting it's half-baked, it's hardly a game changer, it's just about the best they could do to come up with something that was a compromise, keeping everyone happy to some extent. You think it's better than that?
Well, I think it's important to remember where we are in the process. I think it's clear much more needs to happen. Countries need to be prepared to cut their emissions more and shift to a low-carbon economy. But this was a middle COP. This wasn't where all the big decisions were going to be made. So you don't have the countries holding their cards close to their chest. But next year, it's showtime. But I think they've laid the stage for that moment.
What happens between now and next year that will make it easier to come up with something more meaningful then?
Well, there's a whole series of negotiations in February that have now negotiating steps all the work from. But I think what will make it easier is if the highest levels of government engage. It's clear that the United States is engaged. Secretary President Obama is there. All countries need to engage on that level. This is an issue that deserves heads of state attention, and you can't just leave that to negotiators.
Jennifer, thank you. Jennifer Morgan from the World Resources Institute, live with us from Lima. Now to Japan, where exit polls say the ruling coalition, led by Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, has won a comfortable victory in the parliamentary elections. They say the Liberal Democrat Party may not have enough seats on its own to have a two-thirds majority in the lower house, which would allow the Prime Minister to push through his policies even more easily. Good day, though, for Mr. Abe, who told reporters earlier that he plans to continue his efforts to turn
Abenomics policies are still only halfway done, but I believe we've moved away from those dark times 2 or 3 years ago. I'm aware that there are still a lot of people who are still not feeling the benefits of my policies, but it's my duty to bring those benefits to those very people. I believe this election made that clear.
Our correspondent in Tokyo, Rupert Wingfield Hayes, told me it looks as though Mr. Abe's decision to call this snap election has paid off.
I think he'll be extremely pleased that he will believe that this gamble that he's taken has paid off for him very well, because he has got another big majority. He has now got another 4 years, so that will mean 6 years in all. That is, by Japanese standards, a very, very good outcome for the Japanese Prime Minister, and he now has the time to carry through what he says is his economic program. He says he needed the new mandate and the time for that economic program to take effect. But if he wanted to see that, he already had a big majority in Parliament, and that his economic policies are not working. But this is certainly the line that Mr. Abe has set, which is very, very hard for him. He is the only choice. He needs this mandate, and now he's got it, he's doing what he can.
And what does he do now? Because there's been loads of government spending, the economy is still a bit of a mess. So what is his programme to sort that out?
Well, he's always said that his economic programme has got 3 parts to it, and that he's done the first 2. He hasn't really got round to the third bit because it's the difficult bit. And there was a lot of resistance to the difficult structural reforms that a lot of economists say Japan's economy needs. There's a lot of resistance to that, not just from ordinary Japanese people, but more importantly from within Mr. Abe's own Liberal Democratic Party. So, the theory is that he's now got this election mandate, not so much to get the support of the Japanese people, but to crush the opposition within his own party, and that will open the way to him being able to do some very difficult things, like opening up the agricultural sector in Japan to more competition, opening up the healthcare system to more competition, breaking down some of the trade barriers and the internal regulatory barriers that there are to making Japan a more open and competitive economy. I think the jury is still out as to whether he really intends to do this. He says he does, but we have to wait and see whether he's really going to do it, because it is going to be very unpopular.
And is there excitement about this election in Japan, or are people just busy clearing the snow from their driveways?
There is really no excitement about this election in Japan. More than 60% of Japanese people said they didn't think it was necessary. I was at a polling station earlier. There were a trickle of voters coming in. Meanwhile, around the corner, there was a long line of 20-something-year-olds lining up to go to a pancake restaurant. None of them had been to vote. Most of them we spoke to said they thought this was irrelevant and that politics didn't mean anything.
This is Andrew Peach in London. You're listening to the newsroom here on the BBC World Service. David has our main stories.
As we've just been hearing, Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has been re-elected to the Swedish majority to carry out his economic reforms. And the European Union has warned Turkey of Sunday's police raids against opposition journalists for
Now to Egypt, the news of a giant statue of a pharaoh re-erected after 3,000 years. Johnston is here with more. Now tell us about this particular pharaoh.
Well, Andrew, we're talking here about one of the great figures in the story of ancient Egypt. Amenhotep III was a boy king. He inherited the throne at the age of only 12 years old and ruled an empire that spread from Mesopotamia to Sudan. He reigned at a time when Egyptian civilization was at its very height. Its magnificent, and this larger-than-life figure was given colossal monuments in his honour. Among them, this 13-metre-high statue. Brought down by an earthquake 1,000 years ago. So for 30 centuries, he lived on pieces of the field, more than 80 pieces. Now, though, the pharaoh has risen, he's back on his feet, the statue has been restored and unveiled today, and this giant face stands with a white crown of the old papyrus scroll in his hand, and in his belt there's a huge dagger with a handle fashioned in the shape of a falcon's head.
He's not alone, though, on the banks of the Nile.
No, he's just a few metres to his left, as it were. There is another very similar colossal statue of Amenhotep III. It was also brought down by that earthquake, and it too has been restored, put back in its place, and back in March. And these two figures stand at the gates of the famous Royal Funerary Temple compound in Luxor, which boasts yet another two massive seated figures of the king. So we're talking about four colossi now, and this extraordinary world-famous archaeological site has been very much enhanced by today's restoration.
And the context for this is just how important tourism is now, even more so to the Egyptian economy after what's been happening recently.
Well, of course, years now of upheaval that has battered the Egyptian economy in many ways, and any revival of that economy will need to be helped by the tourist industry, which is so important. Visitors coming from all around the world. The legacy of ancient Egypt is so important in that tourist industry, and having it enhanced in the way it was today is only a good thing. The images coming from Luxor today show just how delighted and proud the archaeologists and the local people were about what they see today.
Alan, thanks very much indeed for that. Alan Johnston with me here in the newsroom. Christmas in a couple of weeks, a festival that families are supposed to celebrate together. But what about people who don't speak to their relatives, don't see them anymore? Research in Britain shows a surprisingly large number of people cut links with their families. Let's get more from the newsroom's John McManus.
Christmas. It's a time for families, isn't it? When people of whatever religious belief or none get together to celebrate, commiserate, and sometimes just annoy each other over the turkey. But for some here in Britain, it's more complex. Research gives an early indication that 1 in 5 British families have members who cut their ties with each other. Over 5 million people are frequently shunning at least one relative. Unresolved childhood abuse and lifestyle habits, which are at odds with those in the family unit, are the two main causes, according to Stand Alone, a charity working in the field of family estrangement. But while decisions to disengage from relatives may be a matter of mental self-preservation, the charity's chief executive, Becca Bland, says that many people feel they can't talk about it honestly.
In a sense, we all want to hear a happy story about families at Christmas. It's very but to be able to speak about it is more difficult. Families necessarily together. It's very isolating for individuals to see it and be vilified.
Becca Bland says the sometimes sad reality of family life for some people should be openly discussed, so support can be asked for and offered. It's clearly a sensitive subject, which might appear to be at odds with the spirit of the season. Stand Alone offers practical advice and says it will mount an awareness campaign on social media on Christmas Day.
Today's action from the English Premier League in a moment. First, David with more of today's world news stories.
The authorities in the Democratic Republic of Congo say at least 129 people died when their boat capsized on Lake Tanganyika in the southeast of the country. The Transport Minister for Katanga Province, Laurent Kahozi Sumba, said there are 232 survivors, but it's not clear how many are still missing.
It is a great shock. We are saddened. The local authorities have ensured the rescue of survivors and they are looking after them now, making sure they have food and all they need to live. There is the issue of overloading and also a breach of the regulation against sailing when the visibility is low. And there is also a breach of the code which says life jackets have to be worn. We are going to find out who was responsible and whoever needs to be prosecuted will be.
Ahead of days of diplomatic talks on the Middle East, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said he's determined to counter an expected Palestinian initiative at the United Nations. The Palestinians are likely to press the UN Security Council to back a resolution that would require Israel to end its occupation of Palestinian territories within 2 years. Netanyahu said this would support it bring Islamic extremism to part of Jerusalem, and he wouldn't allow it. The female football fan in Saudi Arabia has fallen foul of the authorities after she managed to infiltrate a male-only crowd. Reports say the woman wore men's clothes to sneak into the match in Jeddah on Friday. She was eventually spotted sitting alone in an area of fans.
Staying with football, sport world is we're meeting up today in the Premier League and Manchester United Liverpool today, Seb.
Yes, and what a difference a few months, a new manager and the departure of a key player to make. In March it was Liverpool who won 3-0 at Old Trafford. Today the tables were turned as United are 3-0 winners with goals from Wayne Rooney, Juan Mata and Robin van Persie. It's now 6 wins in a row for United, who are 5 points behind Manchester City and 8 of them Chelsea. But massive, since they haven't given them a foot catching them.
We are not even in the half of December, so still too many games to go, and we have to think game again.
That's the United midfielder over Liverpool. Their manager Brendan Rodgers felt they could have got something from the game.
I think it tells you everything that their goalkeeper was the man of the match. He made some incredible saves, so our creativity was